Our chapter today in Acts is chapter 25 for our scripture. 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the leaders of the Jews gave him a report against Paul. They appealed to him and requested as a favor to them against Paul to have him transferred to Jerusalem. They were in fact planning an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So, he said, let those of you who have the authority come down with me, and if there is anything wrong about this man, let them accuse him. After he had stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he arrived, the Jews who had gone down from Jerusalem surrounded him, bringing many serious charges against him, which they could not prove. Paul said in his defense, I have in no way committed an offense against the laws of the Jews, or against the temple, or against the emperor. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, asked Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and be tried there before me on these charges? Paul said, I am appealing to the emperor's tribunal. This is where I should be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you very well know. Now, if I am in the wrong and have committed something for which I deserve to die, I am not trying to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can turn me over to them. I appeal to the emperor. Then Festus, after he had conferred with his council, replied, you have appealed to the emperor, and to the emperor you will go.
Well, Paul's in trouble again. Has anybody thought over the last 19 weeks, man, I wish I was Paul. That would be so cool. He has a pretty rough life, I would say. And it seems that the chief priests are up to it again. They were kind of responsible for crucifying Jesus, and now they're trying to press charges to have Paul killed. In fact, they were hoping to ambush him and just kill him instead of kill him the official way. But this is Paul in his early Judean sombrero. And he's been in prison actually for a couple years under Felix, who was the procurator of Judea. And Felix was kind of holding them there to get a little money out of the deal. He was hoping to get a bribe. And so he got replaced by a guy named Festus as the procurator. And yeah, it's probably looks more like this. But Festus had been in town for 3 days when the Jews again came to Festus and pressed these charges against Paul, that they really wanted him, to be charged and not just left in prison. So Festus went up to Jerusalem or up to Caesarea, where they knew Paul would be, and he took the chief priests with him. And then he got on his kind of throne there in sort of like the Supreme Court of the state. And Festus asked him about these charges, and Paul said, basically flat out, I have done nothing wrong, and you're falsely accusing me. And so Festus kind of said, well, do you want to take it to a higher authority? Do you want to bump this up to kind of the Supreme Court of like the United States and meet with King Agrippa, who was the seventh and the last of the Herod the Great family. He was king of Chalcis, which also included the right to supervise the temple in Jerusalem. So Paul says, yeah, I guess I do want to do that. I want to appeal to the emperor. And so Festus says, well, if that's what you want to do, then that's what you will do. And so they sent him off to meet with Agrippa. And through that trial, Agrippa came to the same conclusion that Felix and Festus and everybody else had, that Paul hadn't done anything wrong. So he too put Paul in a little prison. So, yeah, Paul's story is a rough one, but he consistently makes decisions based on what he knows is right, really based on following Jesus, and he's not afraid of the consequences. In his speech to Agrippa, he said, I'm not trying to avoid death here. I'm willing to die. How many of us are willing to die for those kind of causes, for what we really believe? You are. The Faith Singers are going to help me with a little reading. They're very prepared. I just gave it to them this morning. So come on up. Last week we saw that Paul's farewell really paralleled Jesus' farewell. And this week it's really amazing how much Paul's trial with Festus and Agrippa parallels Jesus' encounter with Pilate. So this is a kind of a dramatic reading. It's actually really just read from two different places in the sanctuary, but you can have that. Oh, you got to turn it on.
Now the festival of unleavened bread, which is called the Passover, was near. The chief priests and the scribes were looked for a way to put Jesus to death, for they were afraid of the people.
3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the leaders of the Jews gave him a report against Paul. They were, in fact, planning an ambush to kill him along the way.
Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor said to him,
Are you king of the Jews?
Jesus said, You say so. But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him,
Do you not hear how many accusations they make against you?
But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed.
Paul said in his defense,
I have in no way committed an offense against the law of the Jews, or against the temple, or against the emperor.
Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd,
I find no basis for an accusation against this man.
and Festus said,
King Agrippa and all here present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish community petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had done nothing deserving death.
Thank you. Of course, I was the one to blow it in the reading, even though I've been looking at it for a long time. So thank you. You're very talented. So you can see the parallel, between being brought up on charges, being found innocent, but still having some consequence to pay for that action. Now, I don't know if Paul would have raised his hand if somebody asked him, do you want to be Jesus? But it's possible. Actually, Paul really suffered a lot more than Jesus. In 2 Corinthians, he writes that I've worked much harder. He was not comparing himself to Jesus here. He's comparing himself to his fellow disciples. But I've worked much harder. I've been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Ouch. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from the Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false brothers. Yeah, who wants to be Paul? There might be some qualities about him that would be worth repeating, but his life is a disaster. I can't even imagine having like one of those categories, just being shipwrecked 3 times, that would be crazy. But in comparison, he really, it's a conscious choice on Paul's part. He basically said, I'm going to put myself in these situations because I believe in it. And I don't care really what happens to me. William Willimon wrote that Paul is always in mortal danger. The Lord told Ananias, which was like Paul's trainer in ministry, how much he should suffer for the sake of my name. And he did. Our 6th Phoenix affirmation that we teach around here says, standing as Jesus does with the outcast and the oppressed, the denigrated and the afflicted, seeking peace and justice with or without the support of others. Seeking justice with or without the support of others. What are we willing to take a stand about? What are we willing to risk a little bit of reputation and a little bit of trouble for?
They like to get you in a compromising position. They like to get you there and smile in your face. They think they're so cute when they get you in that condition. But I think it's a total disgrace. And I say, I've got authority, authority always wins. Well, I fight authority, authority always wins. Well, I've been doing it since I was a young kid and I come out grinning. Well, I fight authority, authority always wins. I call up my preacher, I say, give me the strength for round 5. He said, you don't need no strength, you need to grow up, son. I said, growing up leads to growing older than to dying. And dying to me don't sound like all that fun. So I say, I fight authority, authority always wins. Well, I fight authority, authority always wins. Well, I've been doing it since I was a young kid and I come out grinning. Well, I fight authority, authority always wins. I said, oh no, no, no. I said, oh no. Hey, I said, oh no, no, no. I fight authority, authority always wins. Well, I fight authority, authority always wins. Well, I've been doing it since I was a young kid and I come out grinning. Well, I fight authority, authority always wins. I fight authority, authority always wins. I fight authority, authority always wins. Well, I've been doing it since I was a young kid and I come out grinning. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I fight authority, authority always wins. Thank you.
Good job dancing. Thanks. Well, actually, authority doesn't always win. This was a favorite song of mine growing up. My mother loved that. So But it doesn't always win. If Paul did not stand up for the things he stood up, the church would be in an entirely different place today. You know, people would be marginalized and not accepted, not allowed to come into the full relationship with the church and with God. Coincidentally, this week on Thursday, we had a speaker here, Chris Hedges, with our Center for Faith Studies program, and his title is called The Wages of Rebellion, the Moral Imperative of Revolt. He's a Pulitzer Prize writer, author, bestseller, and we have a couple of snippets from what he said.
The very forces of kind of unfettered corporate capitalism have proven to be the enemy of democracy. And those of us, especially those of us who have children, have to stand up. I was very involved in the Occupy movement. I went to jail. I was arrested in front of Goldman Sachs. I don't like going to jail. It's more time than I care to donate to the U.S. government. But I want my children to look back and say that at least their dad tried. And when I write that book is different from the other books, and that it's not prescriptive. It says we must stand up, that resistance is a moral imperative. And I know many of you, like I do, come out of a faith tradition. It is incumbent upon us, especially because we are squandering the future for our children, to resist. And the book is really about that call, that resistance is finally not carried out for what it can achieve, but for who it allows us to become.
I love that last part. You know, our resistance isn't about the outcome, although there have been huge outcomes from resistance, but it's about who it allows you to become, you know, to be true to yourself. How much do we have to shove it down all the time, you know? Where would our country be without resistors? You know, would the civil rights movement have happened? Women's suffrage, marriage equality, all these things would have never happened without somebody saying, no, we resist that. We want that to change. And I think the system would generally just spew off people that, you know, it didn't want and just become a completely marginalized system. And unchecked, that would just continue on because of greed and power until there's a revolt, till somebody says, no, this isn't right. That seems to be the only thing that fixes that kind of system. There's a documentary called Thirst. It was made in 2004, and it traces the privatization, that's a hard word to say, privatization of water. In Bolivia, for instance, the government and corporations came together and decided we're going to control the water flow in Bolivia, and we're going to charge people for water, a resource that was once free. And we all know that, you know, water has become pretty expensive. But do you know what the people did? They went crazy. They went nuts. And they joined together to protest the government, to protest the corporations. They went crazy because they were like, this is our survival. This is a human right to actually have water. And the government, the corporations were saying, no, it's a commodity, and we're going to sell it. So people went crazy. And, you know, it's a survival issue. Maybe that would get us to the point where we can finally say, all right, enough's enough. This is about my survival. And we're facing that today in the climate change discussion. You know, there's some things that are about our survival that are ahead of us if we don't do something about it. We went to see the Pope present to the joint Congress session last week, and afterwards, this person spoke, Dr. Barbara Bathke. She's from the School of Natural Resources in UNL. And she said that at this point, 97% of all scientists believe that humans have contributed to the global climate issues, to the environment, and that, you know, we may or may not be able to bring it back. And she made this other interesting point, that it seems like there's a debate out there. Those who think that the climate is changing due to human involvement, and those who don't. But what she said happens is when a debate forms in like the media, they get an expert from the climate is changing side, and then they get an expert from the climate is not changing side. So it looks like an even debate because there's one person against one person. They're both pretty knowledgeable. But really, almost everyone in the science community believes that the climate is changing, that we are damaging it. It's not 1-to-1, it's like 1,000,000-to-1. Jim Antal was here about a year ago with the CFS program, and he's the conference minister in the Massachusetts conference of the UCC. He works hard against climate change, and he's been put in prison several times in some of his protests that he's involved in. And I remember he said that we need to be about two things in this world. We need to be about divestment from fossil fuels, and we need to be about a little bit of civil unrest. The first time I heard it, I was like, oh, really? Civil unrest, all right. Resistance, just like Paul did when he went to the court and talked to Festus. It's resistance. It's imperative, as Chris Hedges said. It's a moral imperative. And some of you might be fighting a political resistance. Some of you might be involved in the environmental issues that we're facing. I know I see some of those people from the FATE committee out there. But you know, some resistance is a little more personal. It's a little more local. Our lives develop an inertia of ease and convenience. And you sort of go along your life in this easiest path possible. And you don't really challenge the authority or the social structure you're living in. Sometimes it might make you mad, but it's pretty rare that we're challenging it. Maybe we believe that our efforts won't amount to anything, even if we did say something. Maybe we believe that things will change on their own. I don't need to make a big fuss about it. Maybe some of us are afraid, like Ingrid was, to get her name on the board. And maybe some of us just don't care. We're just going to live our life and not worry about the rest of us. Well, I had one of these moments. I was in my last church for 18 years. And one day in October, I was asked to resign from the church, and I was pretty upset by that. My oldest son was a senior in high school, and my daughter was in 8th grade, and my son was younger than that. And we had been here 20 years, and we planted roots that were pretty strong. And in my denomination, when you leave a church, there's a pretty clear path for what you're supposed to do. The path is to fill out this profile of who you are and what you think, and you submit it to your denominational headquarters, and then you wait, and the conference ministers from around the country will get your name, and if they decide that you're somebody that they want to hire, then they'll pass your name on to the churches. I knew that was what I was supposed to be doing. But it wasn't going that great. I talked to maybe 3 or 4 churches, and I wasn't really excited about them. There was one church that I talked with for 6 months. Every time we'd interview, they'd say, we'll get back to you in a month. It's like, I don't have a job. And so by the time they said, we're thinking of canceling our search, I was like, great, I'm sick of you guys. So that was like my only prospect. And then I got a call from Andy Smith, who comes to this church, and he used to go to my church. And he said, Countryside's looking for a youth director. And I was like, I can't do that. It's a mile away from my last church. I used to work right over there, 90th and Dodge. And So I just was like, yeah, okay, Andy, that's crazy. And so then I got a call about a month later from Ginger Peterson, who also goes to this church, who also used to go to my former church. And she said, hey, Countryside's still looking for a youth director. And same thing, thanks, Ginger. That's crazy. So then a friend of mine, about 6 months later, he was just walking by, and his neighbor is Dan Wengert. And he said, hey, my neighbor just told me they're still looking for a youth director at Countryside. And I don't know how many times I need to be told something, but a lot. And a light went off in my head. I was like, maybe I should just check it out and talk to the senior pastor. So I did that. And I was really impressed by what this church is about, and what this church does. And I was like, man, I want to be a part of that. And I was excited again to be in a church, which I had kind of lost talking to those other churches. And so in my denomination, if you wanted to keep your credentials and your ministerial license, you would have to get permission from the conference superintendent to do that. And a lot of people do. There's like 300 covenant pastors that are serving in UCC churches. So I made an appointment and went to talk to the conference minister and ask her, well, I'd like to keep my credentials and move to this church. It's a mile away from my old church, but it's like miles away from my old church. And so she said no, resounding no. And so I had to resign my credentials, and which included a pension, and then I had to leave the denomination. I grew up in that denomination. I was there 40 years. And a lot of my friends around the denomination, we had close relationships, and I had a good reputation. I felt like that was kind of my identity, to be the long-standing youth pastor in a church in that denomination. And, I was a little proud of that, and my identity was with these people. And I knew if I made this choice to come to Countryside, I was going to be forfeiting that. And there's nothing I could do about it. The people are going to say what they're going to say. And if they don't have any information, they're just going to make it up. Believe me, that happens. But I just could not stop and say, no, I'm not going to make this move because of an institutional etiquette issue. I was like, I've got to do this and pay the consequences, And I lost some friends, had some other consequences, but it's been one of the best moves of my life. And I love being here. And it was just an interesting experience to consciously face the trouble that you're going to face for the reason that you're going to face it. And know, all right, this is what I'm going to face if I make this decision. I felt like it was God's leading to come here. Dan Hackett, one of our worship planning team members, said, when you step out and you make the change, your only companion is the Holy Spirit. And that's how we have that strength to be able to make that change, to be able to step out, resist what's going on, resist the movement of our lives or the culture, and just follow what God has for us.